The night air smelled of smoke and rain, and Mavis Harper's fingers trembled as she scrubbed the wooden floor, the echo of her own humming bouncing faintly off the walls. She thought she was alone, but a shadow moved outside the window, a figure as familiar as the ache in her chest. Her heart stuttered. The wind whispered through the canyon like a warning, carrying the distant sound of hooves. For 10 years, Mavis had been nothing but a servant in the town of Red Creek, her hands raw from endless labor and her voice silenced by circumstance. But tonight, humming softly to Mr. Dalton, the sickly neighbor she helped care for, her melody drifted into the night. It wasn't just a tune, it was a thread pulling the past into the present. The door creaked open, and she froze, the rag in her hands quivering. A familiar, commanding presence filled the room. Apache. His broad shoulders were silhouetted against the moonlight, his long black hair catching the dim glow. He moved with the silent strength of someone who belonged to both the earth and the wind. Eyes sharp and unreadable. "Mavis," he said, voice low, carrying a weight of memory and unspoken promises. Her lips parted, but no words came. The humming died in her throat, leaving only the hammering of her heart. "You're still here," he murmured, scanning the room, noticing the faint trail of candlelight and the cluttered furniture that marked a life built on service rather than choice. Still. Alone. Mavis wanted to retreat behind the walls of routine she had built, the invisible armor that had kept her safe from the judgmental stares of townsfolk. But his gaze held a gravity that rooted her in place. Something unspoken passed between them, a history buried beneath years of silence and stolen glances. Outside, the wind pushed against the small panes, rattling them like restless spirits. The smell of damp earth and distant sage filled the air. Mavis inhaled sharply, feeling a pull she couldn't name, fear, longing, and the thrill of finally being seen. The neighbor coughed weakly, a reminder of her nightly duty, but Mavis barely noticed. Apache's presence had shifted something inside her, a spark she thought had long been extinguished. The servant life she had accepted without question suddenly felt like a cage, and for the first time in a decade, she imagined a different life, one that included the man who had returned to her doorstep. "You're humming again," he said softly, leaning slightly against the doorframe. "Why him and not me?" Mavis's cheeks burned. The question wasn't just about the neighbor. It was about every moment she had buried herself in service to others while ignoring her own desires. Apache stepped closer, the scent of pine and leather clinging to him, grounding her in a reality she had almost forgotten. I don't know," she whispered, finally, voice trembling like the first stirrings of dawn. "It just comes out." He didn't smile, not yet. But he nodded, and in that nod was the promise of reckoning, of a past that would no longer remain silent. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across his angular face, and Mavis felt the stirrings of fear and hope in equal measure. Outside, the night deepened, full of secrets and wind-whipped whispers. Inside, Mavis Harper felt the weight of years lift, if only slightly, as a door she had thought closed forever creaked open, and this time, it wasn't her choice alone that would decide if it remained shut. Her life as a servant, she realized, had always been temporary. But tonight, the air thrummed with the possibility that her story was finally hers to write. Mavis Harper barely slept that night. Every creak of the wooden floorboards, every whisper of wind through the cracks in the cabin seemed louder, more deliberate. The memory of Apache standing in the doorway, muscles taut beneath the moonlight, hair falling over his strong shoulders, eyes dark and unreadable, clung to her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. By dawn, she was at the barn, brushing the horses, trying to return to routine. The air smelled of hay, dust, and the faint tang of sweat from the animals. But even in the familiar rhythms of her work, her thoughts strayed to him. Why had he returned? What did he want after all these years? A sharp clatter from the corral made her spin around. Her pulse quickened. A horse pawed at the ground, and beyond the fence, she saw him, Apache mounted on a black stallion, the sun glinting off the beads and feathers he wore. His presence radiated command, but there was a calm to him, too, like a storm that knew exactly when to break. He dismounted silently, boots crunching against the dry earth. Mavis instinctively stepped back, her hands gripping the brush tighter. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her voice was laced with curiosity and something else she couldn't name. "I heard you last night," he said, his voice low, carrying the rhythm of the plains themselves. Humming. "I couldn't ignore it." Mavis's cheeks burned. I was helping Mr. Dalton, that's all." His eyes softened just slightly, but there was an intensity there that made her shiver. "You hum like no one has heard in years," he said. "Like the wind itself has been waiting for it." She blinked, trying to steady herself. Why are you here, Apache? After all this time?" He hesitated, scanning the horizon where the canyon cliffs cut jagged silhouettes against the rising sun. "I came because you need to know. You are not meant to live only in the shadows." Mavis swallowed hard, unsure if he spoke of her work, her life, or something deeper. For a decade, she had been invisible, a servant to others, unnoticed, unheard. And now here he was, a man of the plains, confronting her with the very thing she had buried inside herself, her worth. A sudden cry made them both turn. Mr. Dalton had stumbled outside, clutching his chest, sweat purling on his forehead. Without thinking, Mavis ran to him, guiding him back to the cabin, while Apache followed silently, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder as if to anchor her in the chaos. Inside, the cabin smelled of herbs and old wood. Mavis tended to the neighbor with practiced hands, her mind split between worry and the subtle awareness of Apache watching her every movement. He didn't interfere, didn't offer advice, only observed, patient and present. When Mr. Dalton finally settled, exhausted but breathing, Mavis slumped into a chair. Apache leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, the sunlight outlining the contours of his chest and arms. "You save lives with your hands and your heart," he said quietly. "Yet you've forgotten to save yourself." Her throat tightened. I don't even know how." "You start by remembering," he said, stepping closer. "Remember that you matter, that your song you're humming is not just for others. It is for you." For the first time in years, Mavis felt a flicker of something she had thought lost, hope. But with hope came fear. What would happen if she followed it? If she allowed herself to feel again, to step outside the life she had always known? Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and earth. Apache's gaze lingered on hers, steady and unwavering. The unspoken promise in his dark eyes was enough to make her heartbeat race, that he had returned not just for the past, but for the possibility of something neither of them dared to name yet. "Tomorrow," he said finally, his voice a low rumble, "you'll see me again. We have much to talk about. If you are willing." Mavis nodded, feeling a shiver of both anticipation and dread. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and stirring the dust in the corners, as if the very earth was urging her toward a choice she couldn't ignore. That night, when she hummed again, it was louder, more certain. And for the first time, she hummed not for Mr. Dalton, not for the routines that had kept her safe, but for herself. The sound drifted into the canyon, carrying her heart's secret, her longing, and perhaps the echo of the Apache who had returned to change everything. The following day, Mavis Harper could barely concentrate on her chores. The memory of Apache's dark eyes and commanding presence clung to her like a shadow, tugging at the corners of her thoughts. Even the horses seemed restless, pawing at the dirt as if they too sensed the stirrings of change in the air. By midday, the sun burned hot over Red Creek. turning the wooden rooftops a harsh gold and casting long shadows across the dusty streets. Mavis carried water to the garden behind the cabin, her arms aching from the routine labor. Yet every clink of the bucket, every drop that hit the dry earth, reminded her of the contrast between her ordinary life and the extraordinary figure who had re-entered it. She was startled by a sudden movement at the edge of the canyon. A shadow shifted among the rocks, and before she could react, Apache appeared, descending from a narrow trail with the ease of someone who belonged to these cliffs. His black hair fell in dark waves over his broad shoulders, the tribal jewelry glinting faintly in the sunlight. His presence was magnetic, pulling her gaze as if it had a gravity all its own. "You came again," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why don't you ride into town like the others?" "I do not come for their eyes," he said, scanning the streets below, then looking back at her. "I come for yours." The words made her stomach flutter and her heart beat faster than it should. She wanted to turn away, to bury herself in chores, in safety. But something in his tone, something in the way he moved, told her that avoidance would no longer protect her. He stepped closer, boots crunching on the gravel, and his gaze softened ever so slightly. "There is something you must know," he said. "Something buried beneath the canyon." Mavis frowned, curiosity piqued despite the unease settling in her chest. "Beneath the canyon?" Apache nodded, motioning to the rocks and shadows that twisted in the mid-afternoon light. "Long ago, my people hid what was stolen from us. There are secrets here, Mavis. Secrets that may change everything you think you know about this land and about yourself." Her pulse quickened. For years she had lived a life of quiet service, shielding herself from rumors and trouble, never imagining that her world might expand beyond the narrow routines of Red Creek. Now, standing before him, she realized that a path she had never walked was opening before her, and the man at her side was the guide she never knew she needed. "Why tell me?" she asked cautiously. "Why not someone else?" His eyes darkened, but not with anger. "Because you hum," he said simply. "You hum not only for others, but for what is lost and forgotten. You hear what others cannot. That is why I return, to make sure you are ready." Mavis swallowed hard. The words stirred something deep inside her, a mix of fear, longing, and courage she had thought long dead. "And if I'm not ready?" Apache stepped closer, so near that she could see the tiny flecks of sun reflecting in his dark eyes. "Then you will be," he said quietly. "Or you will have learned that running from the truth only delays it." A sudden shout from the town broke the tension. A cart had overturned in the street, spilling goods and startling the townsfolk. Mavis instinctively grabbed a bucket to help, her movements swift and practiced. Apache followed, moving with a predator's grace yet careful not to interfere. Observing her every action. By the time the chaos subsided, Mavis was flushed with exertion. She realized how closely Apache had watched, his eyes measuring, studying, almost protective. "You have strength," he said, almost to himself. "And more than that, you have fire. Do not let them tell you otherwise." As the sun dipped behind the canyon cliffs, Mavis felt a stirring in her chest, a combination of anticipation and dread. The ordinary life she had clung to for so long was unraveling, and the man who had returned was the catalyst. That evening, as she hummed once more to calm the restless Mr. Dalton, she thought of the canyon, of secrets hidden in shadow, and of the dark, compelling figure who had reappeared in her life. Her song floated through the night air, carrying a courage she did not yet fully understand. And somewhere in the canyon, Apache waited, patient, silent, and unyielding like the wind that always finds its way home. Night fell over Red Creek with a hush, the kind of darkness that seemed almost alive, brushing across rooftops and winding through the alleys like a secret. Mavis Harper stood on the small wooden porch of her cabin, her hands resting on the railing as the cool wind teased her hair. The day's chores were done, but her mind could not stop replaying the image of Apache in the canyon, his gaze sharp, almost knowing, as if he could see the parts of her she had long hidden. A rustle in the shadows made her heart leap. She didn't have to turn. She already knew. Apache emerged from the darkness, silent and steady, every step measured, muscles rippling beneath the moonlight. His long black hair framed a face that was both fierce and tender, his tribal jewelry catching glimmers of silver under the moon. "You're here again," Mavis whispered, part relief, part exasperation. "Don't you ever sleep?" "I sleep when the land sleeps," he said, voice low, carrying the echo of the canyon and the plains beyond. "I came for you." Mavis's breath hitched. His words always felt heavier than air, like they carried weight from a world she couldn't yet reach. "For me?" she asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "Yes," he said simply, stepping closer. The wind swirled around him, lifting strands of his hair, dust floating like tiny sparks in the silver light. "For the girl who hums when no one is listening. For the woman who hides her fire beneath a life of servitude." Mavis swallowed hard, feeling a mix of fear and desire she could no longer suppress. I don't understand," she said. "Why me? I'm nothing." "Just a servant." "You are more than nothing," he replied, kneeling slightly so their eyes met. "You are strong, even if you don't see it. You have endured, and yet you still give of yourself to others. That's strength. It cannot be hidden." The wind carried a scent of sage and pine, mingling with the faint aroma of her own labors, creating a heady mix that made her pulse quicken. For a moment, the world shrank to the porch, the night, and the dark, compelling figure standing before her. I've never been noticed like this before," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Not really. Not by anyone who mattered." Apache's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, the stoic warrior of the canyon became something almost human, almost tender. "You are noticed now," he said quietly. "And I am not the only one who sees you." Her heart pounded at his words, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. Yet fear clung to her like ivy. But what if this changes everything? What if it's too much? "Then we face it together," he said, standing, the moonlight casting long shadows across his chest and arms. "I did not return to watch you hide. I returned to help you claim what is yours, the life you deserve." Mavis's fingers traced the railing nervously, the rough wood grounding her as her mind raced. She had spent a decade living in the shadows, unseen and unheard, but the man before her challenged every instinct of safety she had built. And yet, there was something exhilarating in the risk. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, voice barely audible. "You can," he said firmly, stepping closer so their shoulders nearly touched. "And you will. You have the fire inside you. You always have." The night deepened, crickets and distant coyotes filling the canyon with sound, yet the world between them felt suspended, private, almost sacred. Mavis Harper felt the weight of years lift slightly, replaced by a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she was meant for more than this life of service. Apache's gaze lingered on hers, intense and unwavering, and Mavis realized that for the first time in years, she was seen not as a servant, not as someone to be overlooked, but as a woman with desires, with fire, with a life that could finally belong to her. The wind stirred, lifting his hair and the feathered accents of his tribal jewelry, and Mavis knew that the night had shifted something irreversible. Change was coming, and with it, the promise of a story that was hers to live, and perhaps, a love that dared to exist even in the shadows of Red Creek. The next morning the sun rose in a blaze of gold over Red Creek, turning the wooden rooftops and dusty streets into a sea of firelight. Mavis Harper moved through her chores with a restless energy she had never known before. Even the routine of feeding the horses and collecting water felt charged, as if the world itself anticipated change. A sudden shadow fell across the yard, and Mavis's breath caught. Apache emerged from the canyon path, his black hair blowing in the wind, his muscular chest bare beneath the rising sun, tribal jewelry glinting with each step. His presence commanded attention, and for a moment, the bustling town and its routines faded away. "You're early," Mavis said, setting down the bucket, trying to keep her voice steady. "I could not wait," he replied, his dark eyes scanning the horizon before settling on hers. "There is something you must see. Something hidden beneath the canyon that cannot wait any longer." Mavis hesitated. Fear and curiosity warred inside her. The canyon had always been a place of mystery, a silent sentinel over the town, but no one ventured deep into its shadowed paths. "Hidden?" she asked cautiously. "What is it?" Apache's gaze softened but remained intense. "A path, one that leads to truths long buried. And perhaps to a life you've never dared to imagine." The weight of his words pulled at her, and despite the knot of apprehension in her chest, she found herself following him. They moved silently through the narrow trail that led into the canyon, the sun casting jagged shadows over the rocks, wind rustling the sparse sagebrush. Mavis's pulse quickened as the familiar streets of Red Creek disappeared behind her, replaced by raw, untamed beauty and the scent of earth and pine dot. After what felt like hours but could only have been minutes, they reached a hidden alcove, tucked beneath towering cliffs. Sunlight spilled into the small clearing, revealing a cluster of wildflowers, a trickling stream, and ancient carvings etched into the rock symbols she could not decipher. "This," Mavis whispered, awe creeping into her voice. "I've never seen this before." Apache stepped beside her, muscles rippling as he crouched to touch the carvings. "These markings are older than the town itself," he said softly. "They tell of a people who once roamed these lands freely, who protected what they loved, and who left secrets for those brave enough to find them." Mavis traced the carvings with her fingertips, feeling a shiver of connection to a history she had never known. "Why show me this?" she asked. "Because you are not meant to remain unseen," he said, standing tall again. "You hum when no one listens. You care for others without regard for yourself. You have strength and courage that the canyon itself acknowledges. It is time you understand what that means." Her heart pounded, a mixture of exhilaration and fear. All her life, she had been a servant, invisible, unnoticed. And yet here she was, standing in a secret place with a man whose presence seemed to command the wind, the cliffs, and even the river below. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Apache's gaze met hers, unwavering. "Now you choose? Will you remain hidden, serving others, or will you step into the life waiting for you?" Mavis swallowed hard, the words echoing in her mind. The canyon seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of courage, not just the timid bravery that kept her alive, but a fire that demanded she claim her own story. She began, then paused, watching the sunlight dance over his features. "I want to see." A faint smile touched his lips, the first warmth she had ever seen from the stoic warrior. "Then follow me," he said, turning toward a narrow path that led deeper into the shadows, where secrets and possibilities awaited Dot as they disappeared into the canyon. Mavis felt a thrill unlike anything she had known. For the first time, she was not running from life, she was running toward it, toward the unknown, and toward the man who had returned to guide her. The wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and earth, a promise that change was no longer coming, it had already arrived. The sky over Red Creek darkened by mid-afternoon, clouds rolling in like heavy blankets, shadowing the town in a gray gloom. Mavis Harper paused in her chores, her gaze drawn to the distant canyon where Apache had shown her the hidden alcove. The memory of the carvings and the stream lingered in her mind, a spark of courage igniting in her chest. But the wind carried more than anticipation. It carried a warning. A sudden clap of thunder startled her, and she hurried to secure the barn doors as the first drops of rain spattered the dusty ground. The storm was coming fast, fierce, and unrelenting. Horses whinnied nervously, and the wind whipped around the cabin, shaking the old wood. Mavis's hands trembled, both from fear and the persistent memory of Apache, whose presence had become impossible to ignore. Before she could finish, a shadow moved across the yard, and she turned sharply. Apache stood at the edge of the barn, wet from the rain, his black hair plastered against his broad shoulders, his tribal jewelry glinting with water drops. Even drenched, his muscular frame radiated a commanding presence. Unshaken by the storm, "You should not be out here alone," he said, voice low but carrying over the wind. I had to secure the horses," Mavis replied, though her heart raced at the sight of him. The storm came suddenly. He approached, boots sinking slightly in the muddy ground, each step deliberate. "Storms are dangerous," he said, eyes dark and intense. "And Red Creek is not kind to those who are unprepared." Mavis felt a shiver run down her spine. "I can manage," she said, but the truth echoed in the rain-soaked air. She wasn't sure she could. Not without him. He reached out, steadying a trembling horse, and then his gaze met hers. "You are braver than you know," he said quietly. "But courage alone cannot protect you. You must also trust. Trust yourself, and trust those who care for you." A crack of lightning split the sky, illuminating the storm and casting their faces in stark relief. Mavis felt the electricity in the air, mirrored by the pounding of her heart. In that instant, the barriers she had built over a decade of servitude and invisibility seemed fragile, meaningless against the raw force of the moment. I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You can," he said firmly, stepping closer so that the rain fell between them like a veil. "You have faced hardships most never would, and yet you continue. Strength is not always about fighting. It is about standing when the world tries to bend you." The wind tore at her hair, and the rain soaked through her thin shirt, but she no longer cared. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within her: fear, excitement, longing, all mingled into a whirlwind that left her breathless. "Come," Apache said, extending a hand. "We must take shelter." She followed him through the sheets of rain, hearts pounding in unison, to the hidden alcove they had discovered days before. Water splashed around their boots, mud clinging to their clothes, yet the alcove offered a strange sense of sanctuary. The carvings glowed faintly in the diffused light. The stream trickling stronger with the rain dot. Apache stood close, chest rising and falling, eyes locked on hers. "You are capable of more than you realize," he said. "And soon, the choices you make will define not only your life but the lives around you." Mavis swallowed hard, shivering from the cold, but also from the awareness of him. I want to try," she whispered. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Good," he said, "because hiding is no longer an option. The storm outside is nothing compared to the storm inside, and both are inevitable." Thunder rolled over the canyon, wind tearing through the alcove, but Mavis felt something solid beneath her feet, a strength she had never known. Standing beside Apache, she realized that the path she had feared was also the path she needed. And in the rain-soaked canyon, with the storm raging around them, she vowed to step into the unknown. No longer a servant to others' expectations, but the master of her own story. The storm had passed, leaving Red Creek drenched in a silver dawn. Puddles shimmered on the dusty streets, reflecting the first pale light of morning. Mavis Harper stood on the wooden porch of her cabin, hair still damp, clothes clinging from yesterday's rain, and a sense of awe settling over her. The world felt new, as if a storm had washed away not just mud and dust, but the weight of years spent unseen. A soft crunch of boots on the porch made her turn. Apache appeared, long black hair still wet, tribal jewelry glinting in the sunlight, chest bare and muscles defined, his presence commanding yet comforting. The air between them carried the quiet hum of the canyon and the town, the aftermath of both storm and revelation. "You stayed through it," he said quietly, voice carrying warmth she had not expected. "I had to," she replied, eyes meeting his. I didn't want to run anymore." He stepped closer, the sunlight tracing the contours of his powerful frame. "You don't have to," he said. "Not ever again. You have the strength to face anything now, and you will not face it alone." Mavis felt her chest tighten, a mixture of relief and emotion threatening to spill over. For the first time, she realized that she was no longer merely a servant, invisible to the world. She was someone who mattered, someone capable of choosing her path, of living freely. "I think I understand now," she whispered, her voice catching. "The canyon, the carvings, even you. They've shown me that my life can be more than what I thought it was." Apache's eyes softened, yet retained that intense depth that had captivated her from the start. "Exactly," he said. "And this is only the beginning. The choices you make now will shape the life you've always deserved. One built not on servitude, but on courage, on your own voice, your own heart." She took a tentative step toward him, the rough wood of the porch grounding her as she faced the man who had become her guide, her anchor, and perhaps something more. "And what about us?" she asked, the question trembling on her lips. His gaze lingered, unwavering, and then he reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "If you wish it," he said softly, "we will face the world together. No more hiding, no more silence. Only life and what we choose to make of it." Mavis's heart swelled. A decade of being unseen, unheard, and undervalued fell away in an instant. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the town, the canyon, and the two of them standing together as if the world had paused for this single moment. I want that," she said, finally, a tremor of joy in her voice. "I want to live. Truly live." A faint smile touched Apache's lips, and he lowered himself to her level, eyes locking with hers. "Then you shall," he said, "and we will carve a path together like the ones etched in the canyon long ago. Your strength, your fire, they are not to be hidden. They are to be celebrated." Outside, the town began to stir, unaware of the quiet revolution taking place on a single wooden porch. Mavis Harper felt the past slipping from her fingers like sand, leaving only possibility, courage, and the promise of freedom. For the first time in her life, she hummed not for others, not out of habit or duty, but for herself. The melody floated into the morning, carried on the breeze, strong and certain, echoing off the canyon cliffs, through the streets of Red Creek, and into the heart of a man who had returned to remind her of who she truly was. Apache stepped closer, enveloping her in a protective yet gentle embrace. Mavis felt warmth, strength, and safety all at once, knowing that the storm, both within her and around her, had passed. And as the sun fully broke over the horizon, she realized she was no longer the woman who had spent 10 years unseen. She was Mavis Harper, free, alive, and ready to face the world, with the man who had returned to her side guiding her every step of the way. The canyon whispered in the wind, carrying the promise of new beginnings. And for Mavis Harper, the dawn had finally arrived.